Touch it and I'll have you arrested for breathing near a luxury vehicle, she snapped, standing beside the garish neon green Lamborghini parked diagonally across my driveway. She jabbed a finger at my chest, then smirked and added, I dare you to touch my Lambo, tough guy. The woman had guts, I'll give her that. Entitlement baked into every inch of her fake tan skin and French manicured nails. She blocked my gate with her $200,000 fiberglass trophy, then dared me to do something about it, assuming I wouldn't. Or couldn't. She didn't know I owned the land. Or the tank. Now, when I say tank, I don't mean some dinky off-brand ATV. I'm talking about a fully restored, street-legal FV-432 armored personnel carrier with treads, a periscope and yes, a working horn-eye program to play Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. I restored it as a passion project, partly for fun and partly because the local HOA had gotten so invasive I wanted them to know exactly how far I'd go to defend my property. It sat in the barn out back, quiet and covered, until Karen from across the street decided her Lambo needed more visibility for social content. Blocking my front gate was apparently part of her influencer strategy. Let me back up. My name's Connor. I live in a semi-rural gated community in Texas that thinks it's Beverly Hills. You know the type. Massive stucco homes, HOA fines for mismatched mailbox colors, and neighbors who film your lawn height for sport. I inherited my property from my uncle, who built it back when the whole area was still ranchland. So technically, I don't answer to the HOA. They hate that. Karen especially. Karen Delacroix, yes, Delacroix, married rich, moved in 3 years ago, and decided she was the neighborhood's aesthetic authority. She didn't like that my house was wooden. Or that I grew heirloom tomatoes instead of hedges. Or that I once had the audacity to leave a wheelbarrow visible from the road. It all escalated last Thursday. I came home from town with a new hydraulic pump for my tractor, only to find my gate completely blocked. The neon green Lambo was parked sideways like it had drifted into position. Karen stood by it with a ring light, fake laughing while her assistant, a woman named Brittany who always looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, filmed her leaning against the hood in slow motion. I honked. Nothing. I honked again. Karen waved me off like I was an extra in her TikTok. So I got out, calm as ever, and asked her to move it. She didn't say a word. Just pointed to my boots and muttered something about farm trash. I repeated the request. She finally turned to me, eyes hidden behind oversized white sunglasses, and said, You don't own the road, hillbilly. Besides, the lighting's perfect right now. You can wait. I informed her that while I didn't own the road, I did own the gate, the driveway, and the land underneath her four-wheeled Peacock. She laughed in my face, told me to call the HOA, and added that her husband knows people in law enforcement. Then came the dare. I dare you to touch my Lambo. So I didn't. Not yet. I just took a picture, went inside, and ate a grilled cheese while considering my options. Call the sheriff? Maybe. But Karen's husband did know people, and I'd seen firsthand how that bought her immunity from previous nonsense. Besides, she wanted a reaction. She wanted drama she could spin into victimhood for her Instagram stories. So I waited. The sun dipped lower. Her chute dragged on. At one point, she changed into a sequined romper and posed sitting on the hood, which I'm fairly certain violates every rule of owning a supercar. Still, I waited. At 7:16 p.m., I sent Brittany a text. Yes, I'd gotten her number last year after she asked if she could buy eggs from me off record because Karen's organic grocery rules didn't allow anything with visible dirt. I asked if she wanted a heads up before I moved the Lambo. 3 dots. Then a reply. If you're serious, do it fast. She just poured rose on herself for a wet look shoot and we've got maybe 15 minutes of light left. I grinned. Time to roll. I opened the barn doors like I was revealing a sacred relic. The FV-432 sat gleaming under halogen bulbs, all British steel and angular menace. I started the engine. It purred like a very large, very angry cat. My neighbor Terry saw the barn doors open and ran outside holding a beer, whooping like it was NASCAR. I pulled out onto the gravel, rolled down the path, and turned toward the front drive. The roar echoed between the stucco palaces. Porch lights flicked on. Karen didn't notice, too busy lying back on her windshield with her knees bent, fake laughing into a 4K camera. Until the horn played Wagner. She jerked upright like someone had tasered her. The tank rolled into view, headlights glaring. I didn't speed. I didn't swerve. I just slowly advanced toward her Lambo, at about 3 miles per hour, the kind of crawl that makes everything more terrifying. She screamed something unintelligible, jumped off the hood, and sprinted toward my flower beds in her heels. Brittany dropped the camera. Terry cheered. Now, here's the thing about an armored vehicle on treads, it doesn't crush a car so much as dismantle it layer by layer. The Lambo's fiberglass panels exploded like brittle candy. The tires popped. The windshield crumpled into sugar glass. And through it all, I didn't blink. I just kept driving until the rear end of the car disappeared beneath me. When I stopped, half of the Lambo was mulch. The rest looked like it had been in a Michael Bay movie. Karen shrieked, fell to her knees, screamed again. You psycho. You absolute psycho. That was a $200,000 car. I turned to her, calm as a monk, and said, You dared me. She looked like she might physically implode. Red-faced, spitting, mascara running. She threatened lawsuits, jail time, media exposure. Brittany, to her credit, started filming again, pointing the lens right at Karen. I climbed down, checked the treads for anything dangerous, then walked past her toward my front door. You have a good evening now, I said as I shut it behind me. That's when the real fun started. Because Karen didn't just want revenge. She wanted control. And she was about to drag the entire HOA into a war over what she called vehicular terrorism. What she didn't know was that her Lambo wasn't registered in her name. It was technically under her husband's business lease, something I'd already discovered through a little public registry sleuthing after she tried to find me for unsightly compost bins last year. But that bombshell would drop later. For now, all I did was pour myself a drink and smile as sirens started wailing in the distance. I woke up the next morning to the sound of a diesel engine idling at the front gate and the high-pitched squawk of someone yelling into a phone. Karen had returned. And this time, she brought company. Her husband Greg, a man whose personality was forged in the fires of used car dealerships and expired cologne. He paced in front of what was left of the Lamborghini like a man mourning a fallen soldier, gesturing wildly while Karen stood beside him with an iced coffee and murder in her eyes. Behind them, 2 sheriff's deputies leaned against their cruiser with the kind of posture that said we really don't want to be here. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, dressed in the same flannel and jeans I wore every morning. One of the deputies raised a hand in greeting. The other just shook his head and muttered something to his partner. Karen saw me and immediately launched into a shriek about malicious destruction of luxury property and intentional sabotage with a military-grade weapon. I raised an eyebrow and took a long sip of coffee. Greg stormed up my driveway like he owned the place. You think you can just destroy someone's car and walk away? That Lambo was leased through my dealership's corporate line. You have any idea what kind of people I work with? He was about an inch shorter than me, slicked back hair, teeth too white for morning light. I said nothing, just waited. He poked a finger at my chest. I'm calling in everything I've got. You're going to wish you lived in a cardboard box when I'm done suing you into one. The deputies finally approached. Sir, one of them said to me, we got a call about vehicle damage and possible threats involving heavy equipment. Do you want to explain what happened? I nodded. Happy to. Would you like to see the security footage? I had installed cameras all over my property after the last round of HOA drama. Karen once tried to claim I'd installed wind chimes that were offensive to the community's auditory palate. They'd mysteriously gone missing until the cameras caught her snipping the string at 3 a.m. in a bathrobe and crocs. That was the moment I realized this woman was committed. The footage of her parking the Lambo, refusing to move it, and explicitly daring me to touch it played beautifully on the deputy's in-car monitor. One of them actually laughed when she poured rose on herself. When the tank rolled into frame, he paused the video and looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, he warned you, and you issued a dare." Karen exploded. "That's not a legal invitation. That's sarcasm. You people are supposed to enforce the law, not validate hillbillies with tanks." The deputy turned to Greg. "Sir, is the vehicle in your name?" Greg hesitated. "It's under the company's fleet plan, but—" The deputy cut him off. "Then technically, sir, the damage is a civil issue between two corporate entities. We're not seeing criminal intent." Karen shrieked like someone just lit her Uggs on fire. "He ran over a Lamborghini. You're telling me that's not a crime?" The other deputy shrugged. "Well, you parked it on private property, ignored multiple requests to move it, and told the owner to go ahead and touch it. So, no ma'am, I wouldn't call that a crime. At best, it's a stupid accident involving two very stubborn people and an unfortunate car." Greg clenched his fist. "This isn't over." Then he looked at the tank and added, "Where the hell did you even get that thing?" I smiled. "eBay. And a background check." They left in a cloud of frustration and dust, but not before Karen turned back at the gate and screamed, "You'll be hearing from our HOA attorney." And just like that, the HOA war officially escalated. The first volley came 2 days later. I received a letter, hand-delivered, because apparently we're living in the 1800s, accusing me of creating a hostile living environment, operating unauthorized military equipment, and demolishing community aesthetics through willful recklessness. It was written in the kind of legalese that reeks of cheap templates and caffeine-fueled rage. The signature at the bottom? Margot Blensley, HOA president, a woman who once fined a neighbor for letting his toddler draw chalk art on the sidewalk. I replied in kind, on letterhead from my own LLC, which I conveniently use for consulting contracts, tax deductions, and now, legal pettiness. My reply outlined in bulletproof detail how my property predates the HOA charter, how I am legally exempt from its jurisdiction, and how their letter constitutes harassment under 3 separate state codes. I also attached a copy of Karen's dare, a transcript of the police visit, and a notarized statement from Brittany, who, bless her, had already quit working for Karen and offered her full cooperation if things got messy. The HOA's next move was predictable. They tried to fine me. First $500 for unauthorized equipment storage. Then $1,000 for creating a disruptive noise nuisance with machinery. Then, my personal favorite, $1,500 for emotional distress caused to surrounding neighbors through egregious displays of vengeance. I didn't pay a cent. Instead, I forwarded the letters to my lawyer, who I keep on retainer specifically for HOA-related nonsense. He lives for this stuff. By Friday, we had filed a cease and desist order and a motion to investigate the HOA's financial practices. Turns out, they were funneling landscaping fees into Karen's side business, an eco-aesthetic influencer collective that never actually landscaped anything. But the real kicker came from Brittany. She sent me a hard drive filled with unedited footage of Karen's influencer videos, dozens of clips where she name-drops fake sponsors, lies about charitable donations, and in one memorable scene, screams at a Girl Scout for setting up a cookie stand without a social media permit. I didn't leak it. I didn't have to. I simply mailed it, anonymously, to Margot Blensley and copied the IRS. By Monday, Karen was in meltdown mode. She showed up at my property, again, this time with a tripod, a ring light, and a live audience on her phone. She went on a rant about how I was a danger to suburban safety, how I glorified violence against women, and how her car died a martyr's death. I stood silently at the gate, arms folded, watching her broadcast herself into the digital void. Then, calmly, I walked over, tapped the side of the tank with my boot and said, "Want a rematch?" Her live stream cut out. That afternoon, I received another visit. Not from the HOA. Not from Karen. From Greg. Only this time, he wasn't yelling. He was sweating. Nervous. Carrying a manila folder in his hand and looking like someone told him the IRS just found his second yacht. He asked to talk privately. I let him. Inside, at the kitchen table, he laid out the folder. "We need to settle this," he said. "Karen's losing sponsors. The HOA's being audited. The dealership's getting cold calls from journalists. And someone sent anonymous footage to the Better Business Bureau." I kept my face blank. He continued. "If this keeps going, we both lose. You might be in the right legally, but the optics, it'll drag on. So I'm offering a deal. Drop everything. In exchange, the HOA stops the fines. Karen posts an apology video. And you get a written exemption from all current and future HOA interference." I sipped my coffee. "And the car?" He paused. "It was leased. Already totaled. The company's eating the cost." I leaned back. "Add one more thing. Karen deletes every video with me in it. Every photo. Every mention." He nodded slowly. "Done. You'd be amazed how quickly the word mineral rights can change a game. It's the kind of phrase that sounds dusty and irrelevant until you realize it can upend property values, freeze construction permits, and make the county planning office very nervous. Most people buy houses without ever looking into what's under them. Karen and Greg were definitely in that category. They thought they bought a luxury home on a pristine lot in a gated suburb. What they actually bought was a surface dwelling sitting on top of land I still owned in a legal sense, down to about 200 feet below. See, back when my uncle subdivided the ranch and sold parcels to developers, he retained the subsurface rights to most of it. That meant oil, gas, minerals, and even the soil were still legally his. And I inherited that along with the main house. It was one of those strange quirks in land law, useless most of the time, but when it becomes useful, it's like holding a nuclear option wrapped in paperwork. So while Karen was filing her little complaints and bringing in fake inspectors to poke around my shed, I was in a quiet little meeting with my lawyer, a mineral rights consultant, and a geotechnical engineer. The latter had just finished a survey that confirmed what my uncle always suspected: there were shale formations under our land. Possibly minor natural gas deposit. Not enough to launch a drilling boom, but just enough to justify a preliminary claim and get the county involved. Which I did. I filed a formal notice of intent to explore subsurface rights on 5 parcels, including the one Karen's house sat on. It was a routine filing. Didn't mean I was actually going to drill anything. But it triggered a flood of paperwork that required environmental assessments, property notifications, and a pause on any remodeling, renovations, or landscaping on the affected lots. In other words, Karen couldn't so much as repaint her front steps until the county signed off. I didn't tell her. I let the letter arrive from the planning office. She showed up at my gate the next morning like a hyena that had been pepper-sprayed. Face red, hair wild, holding a crumpled letter that she waved like a flag of war. "What is this?" I sipped my coffee. "Looks like official county communication. You filed for fracking rights under my house?" "No," I said calmly. "I filed for mineral exploration. It's very different. Fracking would require a dozen permits and millions in equipment. This is just a quiet little test. Might not even happen." She shrieked. "You're doing this to punish me." "Karen, I've been nothing but reasonable," I said, deadpan. "You parked a sports car on my land, slandered me in the neighborhood, tried to tow my tank, and launched an illegal campaign to have my property condemned. I've been extremely restrained." She switched tactics. "This will ruin our property value. Should have thought of that before declaring war." She left sputtering, and for a brief moment I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd back down. But then the signs started appearing. Literally. Karen had printed banners, big ones, and hung them along her fence. One read, "Protect our neighborhood from greed." Another said, "Stop toxic drilling." She even got a few of her wine club minions to post about me in local Facebook groups, calling me a land pirate and eco-saboteur. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so transparently desperate. But then she made her biggest mistake. She got the HOA, still run by her husband's Uncle Howard, to vote on a special emergency rule banning vehicles over £10,000 from being stored on residential lots. That was a direct shot at the tank. Never mind that it was registered, historic, and technically part of my museum. Howard claimed it was a public safety issue. They gave me a week to remove it or face daily fines of $2,000. I could have fought it, easily. But I didn't. Because I had something better. That Saturday, I invited the entire community to a farewell ceremony for the tank. I posted it online with the caption, "Come say goodbye to the legend before the HOA buries history under bureaucracy." It went viral again. Even a local news crew showed up. I let them interview veterans, kids, neighbors. They all talked about how much they loved the tank, how it brought the community together. Karen tried to protest again. She held up signs, screamed about pollution. One reporter caught her yelling, "My yard isn't a gas field," and the clip made it to the evening news. But the best part? I didn't actually remove the tank. I moved it to the parcel next to my house, still part of my property, but technically outside the HOA jurisdiction thanks to an annexation loophole left over from the original ranch boundary. It now sat in a brand new pole barn I had built under a commercial use license. Because now it wasn't just a tank. It was a registered exhibit at my newly founded nonprofit, the Independent American Armor and Heritage Center. Tax-exempt, legally protected, open to school tours. Karen didn't just fail to ban it. She'd helped make it famous. The next morning, I received a letter from the county stating that their inspectors had completed a preliminary assessment and would be conducting seismic surveys near her property line. That meant more flags, more noise, and more restrictions for Karen's landscaping. She posted a furious video, tears, eyeliner, screaming about tyranny by Tank Guy. It got ratioed so hard that even her last sponsor dropped her. Greg, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. Rumor had it he'd moved into a corporate apartment in Austin. Karen claimed he was traveling for business. A week later, her Lexus disappeared. Then the cleaning service stopped coming. Then the lawn got overgrown. Neighbors began speculating: divorce? Bankruptcy? Lawsuit? All I knew was that the woman who once hosted sunset rose parties with drone footage was now screaming at squirrels from her porch. But she still had one final card to play. One night, just after midnight, my motion sensors tripped. Cameras lit up. I checked the feed and saw a figure creeping toward the tank barn with something in her hands. I zoomed in. It was Karen. She had a sledgehammer. I called the sheriff immediately, then got dressed and walked outside with my floodlights on. The tank barn lit up like a football stadium. Karen froze mid-step, sledgehammer raised. Then she dropped it and ran. She didn't make it far. Deputies caught her trying to hop the fence behind the HOA clubhouse. She was arrested on the spot, trespassing, attempted vandalism, and violating a restraining order I'd quietly filed 2 days earlier after she threatened to make the tank disappear. When they put her in the back of the cruiser, she locked eyes with me and screamed, "You think you win? This isn't over." I just waved. The next morning, neighbors gathered like it was a block party. Someone brought muffins. Mrs. Granger set up folding chairs. We watched the deputies load Karen into a van for transport to county lockup. Her house sat quiet behind her, empty. I learned later that she'd missed multiple property tax payments. Greg had stopped paying the mortgage. The house went into pre-foreclosure within the month. Karen hadn't just lost the battle. She lost the war. But I still had one last move. One final twist to wrap it all up with a bow. Because that house? That pretentious McMansion she built her empire of delusion on? It was about to hit auction. And guess who had been quietly buying up HOA foreclosures under a holding company name? Yeah, me. The first sign that Karen wasn't finished came 3 days after our so-called truce. I got home from running errands to find a flyer duct-taped to my mailbox, my front gate, and, somehow, the side of my chicken coop. Each one featured a grainy, zoomed-in photo of me standing beside my tank, captioned in aggressive bold font, "This man destroys property. He's not safe for our community." Below that was a fake testimonial from a neighbor, claiming I had run over multiple family pets with military equipment and threatened to flatten anyone who disagreed with him. At the bottom, in red ink, were the words, HOA Awareness Initiative. I don't spook easy, but I do take slander seriously. I checked my cameras, and sure enough, the footage showed Karen slipping through the gap in the HOA fence at 4 a.m., armed with a staple gun and a stack of flyers. She wore a hoodie this time, gray, oversized, no doubt borrowed from Greg, but there was no mistaking her. The way she tiptoed across my lawn like a raccoon with a vendetta? Classic Karen. I collected the flyers, filed a complaint for trespassing, and waited. No immediate response. Not from Karen. Not from the HOA. But then the texts started rolling in. Neighbors asking if the rumors were true. Some passive-aggressive, others curious. A few openly supportive. One of them, Dave from 3 houses down, even stopped by with a 6-pack and said, "If you ever do want to run over someone, I've got a short list." So, at least I still had allies. But Karen wasn't aiming to just smear me. She wanted escalation. And 2 days later, she got it. A bright orange notice appeared on my gate. Immediate compliance required. Unauthorized vehicle to be impounded per Section 14F. It had the HOA logo on it, but this wasn't the usual nonsense about trash bins or weeds. This was a formal vehicle seizure notice. For the tank. I blinked at the paper for a full minute before I laughed out loud. Then I reread it to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It claimed my FV 432 violated aesthetic regulations and posed an ongoing threat to neighborhood harmony. Apparently, the HOA had declared it an illegal structure, citing a made-up subclause involving excessive visual mass. I didn't know whether to be insulted or impressed by the creativity. At the bottom of the notice was a name I hadn't seen before, Howard K. DeGrasse, interim HOA chair. That was new. I did a little digging and found out that Margot Blensley, the former president, had quietly stepped down. Too much heat from the audit, probably. So who was Howard? Turns out, he was Greg's uncle. A retired accountant with a superiority complex and a passion for bylaws. Karen had installed him like a little HOA puppet king. Now things made sense. With Karen stripped of influence and the public apology still fresh on her feed, she was pulling strings behind the curtain. And she wasn't going to stop until I was buried in red tape or ran screaming into the woods. I called my lawyer again. He practically giggled when he saw the notice. They're trying to redefine a tank as a structure? That's new. He filed a formal challenge, citing state code, federal vehicle classification laws, and, just for fun, a historical preservation clause. The HOA had no legal standing, but that didn't stop them from doubling down. The next morning, a tow truck arrived. A massive industrial flatbed designed to move construction equipment. 2 men in neon vests stood at my gate, looking up at the tank and then down at their clipboard with the expressions of people who suddenly regretted their job. One of them called out, "Sir, we're supposed to impound this thing?" I stepped outside, arms crossed. "You mean the fully registered, street-legal historic vehicle on private property that you have no jurisdiction to touch?" The other guy checked the paperwork. "Honestly, I'm not even sure where we'd hook the winch." They left without loading a thing. Karen, who had been watching from behind a bush with her phone out, screamed in frustration and stormed back inside. But I was tired of playing defense. I wanted her out of my business permanently. So I made a call. See, what Karen didn't know was that the barn where I kept the tank wasn't just a storage space. I had registered the entire structure as a small historical vehicle museum through a loophole in county zoning laws. That meant not only was the tank protected, it was officially part of a public exhibition space. And once something is registered as a public facility, you're allowed to host events. With signage. With visitors. So I announced it online. This Saturday, open day at the Rolling Iron Heritage exhibit. Come see the tank that survived a Karen attack and lived to tell the tale. It went viral. Local Facebook groups shared it. Reddit picked it up. A military historian messaged me asking for spec. By the time Saturday rolled around, my driveway looked like a tailgate party. Families came with kids. Vets showed up in jackets full of patches. A food truck parked itself outside without asking. I let it stay. Terry brought his smoker and started handing out ribs. The tank became a selfie hotspot. And right at noon, Karen burst through the crowd like a seagull in a hurricane. "This is not a legal event," she screeched, shoving through people holding lemonade cups and balloon swords. "There are children here. This is a weapon of war. You can't just parade it around like some circus act." I smiled. "Welcome to the museum. Admission's free." She stormed up to the front of the barn and started filming again, waving her arms and shouting about safety violations and criminal glorification. That's when Officer Ramirez from the local sheriff's office, who had come by on his day off to see the tank, walked over and gently lowered her phone. "Ma'am," he said, "you're trespassing on private property open for public access under Zoning Code January 1st, 42. You need to either enjoy the event or leave quietly." She sputtered. "But this is harassment. He's staging this whole thing to humiliate me." Officer Ramirez smiled. "Seems like he's just letting the community enjoy a piece of history. You're the only one yelling." She stood there for a moment, twitching like she couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. Then she pivoted and stormed back toward her house, only to trip over a balloon sword and nearly faceplant into the grass. The crowd gasped. A kid giggled. Someone took a picture. Karen scrambled up, snarled something I couldn't hear, and vanished through the gate. Later that evening, as the last few people trickled out and the food truck packed up, I sat beside the tank with a beer and stared up at the pink-streaked sky. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. I'd embarrassed her. Blocked every move. Used her own arrogance against her. I'd won. But then my phone buzzed. It was Brittany. The message said, "Heads up. Karen's filing an emergency HOA complaint to have your entire property declared a civil nuisance zone. She's trying to get county inspectors involved. She also hired a private investigator." I read it twice, blinked, then set the phone down. Karen wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to erase me. House, land, reputation, everything. She wanted to make it so miserable here that I'd sell and leave. But what she didn't realize was that I hadn't shown my full hand yet. Because the land Karen lived on? The lot her pristine McMansion sat on? It used to be part of my family's property. And I still owned the mineral rights. The auction was held on a blisteringly hot Wednesday morning in a concrete parking lot behind the county courthouse. No shade, no chairs, just a scratchy loudspeaker and a sweaty crowd of real estate agents, rubberneckers, and opportunists sniffing for distressed property. I wore jeans, a clean button-down, and sunglasses. Nothing flashy. Just calm, quiet intent. Most of the people there didn't recognize me. A few did. A couple of neighbors gave me nods, one even whispered, "Is this the one?" I gave him a slow smile. Yep, this was the one. Karen's house, once the symbol of HOA tyranny and delusion, was being sold off like expired cereal. According to public record, Greg had stopped payments the same week Karen was arrested. He drained a joint business account to cover legal costs, then skipped town. Their marriage, predictably, was as solid as her understanding of property law. The bank foreclosed fast. No appeals. No delay. Karen didn't have the cash, the credit, or the allies left to stop it. She was still in county holding on a string of charges, most of them upgraded after they reviewed the security footage of her attempted midnight vandalism. I'd done my homework. The bidding would start at a fraction of the home's market value due to liens, fines, and unpaid dues. Thanks to a few discreet shell LLCs and a patient lawyer, I was holding all the chips. I didn't need to bid high. I just needed to make sure I was the one holding the paddle when the hammer fell. The auctioneer adjusted his mic, mopped his forehead, and announced the first property. Parcel 104C, 5-bedroom, 4-bath, 3-car garage, located within he hesitated, the Ridgewood Hills HOA district. There were chuckles from the crowd. Everyone had heard the stories. Karen had made sure of that. Opening bid, the auctioneer called, $95,000. A moment passed. Silence. Then I raised my paddle. 95. Someone else tried to enter, some shark from Austin who smelled blood in the water, but I raised again. 110. 120. 130. He backed off at 135. The auctioneer looked around. Any advance on 135? Going once, going twice, sold. The hammer dropped. I had just bought Karen's house. Technically, my LLC had. But let's not split hairs. By the time I got the keys, the place was already a ghost. The fridge was empty. The closet stripped. The furniture was gone. All that remained was a cracked vanity mirror in the master bathroom and a pile of sun-faded HOA newsletters shoved in the pantry. I walked through it slowly, the echo of my boots bouncing off the marble tile Karen had once bragged about in a neighborhood Facebook group. Her signature lavender accent wall was still in the dining room. The giant gold K&D letters that once hung over the fireplace had left a clean rectangular outline where dust hadn't reached. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet, satisfied, like a long breath finally exhaled. I didn't need revenge photos. Didn't need to livestream it or rub her nose in it. The win was in the silence, in the paperwork, in the fact that the same woman who once dared me to touch her car now technically needed my permission to walk onto her former front lawn. And I wasn't done. 2 weeks later, I filed paperwork to formally withdraw the parcel from the HOA. That's right, under a clause buried deep in the original charter, parcels older than the HOA formation could be removed if purchased at auction by a non-member and certified as exempt. It hadn't been used in decades, but I had the deed, the mineral rights, and now the house. I posted the announcement publicly. As of today, Parcel 104C is no longer part of the Ridgewood Hills HOA. It will be repurposed as a community relief and education center for veterans and local youth. The HOA board exploded. Greg's uncle Howard resigned within a week. He claimed personal reasons, but rumor had it he'd received a visit from a county auditor with questions about expense reports. The board tried to rally, to vote in a new president. But no one wanted the job. No one wanted to face the neighborhood knowing the infamous Karen property now sat in the hands of the man she'd waged war on. Neighbors started knocking on my door, not with complaints but with casseroles, lawn chairs, questions about volunteering. The woman who used to glare at me from her porch while trimming her hedges offered to help repaint the interior. Dave from down the street brought over boxes of educational supplies and a full-sized American flag, he said used to fly at his brother's firehouse. We opened the new center on a breezy Sunday morning. The sign out front read, "The Delaney House, named after my uncle." The tank sat in the pole barn nearby, polished and majestic, now with a new plaque and velvet ropes for photos. Kids played in the yard where Karen once posed for Instagram. People laughed where once there had been petty fines and noise complaint. A food truck served tacos out front, and someone started an impromptu guitar circle under the pergola Karen had paid $12,000 to install. And then, like a ghost from a cancelled soap opera, Karen returned. She came walking up the road one afternoon, 3 days after her release from jail. She looked different. Smaller. No makeup, hair limp, wearing a gray hoodie with no brand logo. She didn't film. Didn't yell. Just stood there at the fence and watched. I walked out. Calm. Same old jeans and flannel. I didn't say anything. Just waited. She looked at me like a balloon with the air sucked out. You really bought it. Every inch, I said. And the HOA let you pull it out. They didn't have a choice. She stared at the house, then at the tank, then back at me. You turned it into a youth center? I nodded. There was a long pause. Why? She asked, voice cracking just enough to sound human. You could have turned it into a garbage pit, or blown it up, or sold it to some slumlord. I thought for a second. Because spite has a short shelf life, and victory tastes better when it helps someone else. She blinked. Are you going to ban me from coming back? Technically, you're trespassing. She winced. But, I said slowly, if you want to volunteer, paint walls, mow the lawn, maybe learn what community actually means, I won't stop you. She stared at the ground, said nothing, then walked away. I never saw her again. Greg officially filed for divorce 6 weeks later. The HOA dissolved that fall. With no president, no funds, and half the neighborhood opting out, the whole thing folded in on itself like a dying star. The bylaws were shredded, the fines voided, and the name Ridgewood Hills was quietly removed from county signage. People started calling it Delaney Acres. The tank still sits in the pole barn. Polished. Quiet. A monument not to war, but to the day a man refused to be bullied off his land by ego, entitlement, and a Lamborghini. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, if I could have just let it go, ignored her, moved the tank, swallowed my pride. I always give the same answer. Sure, I say. I could have walked away. Then I pause. But she dared me.